momentum. And then the other big one is if you don't know anything, ask. And the reason I say that is I think that's a really important lesson that you can carry over into any walk of life. And being on a submarine, if you don't know something, it could have massive sort of ramifications on the safety of the submarine and the crew and your mates essentially. So you best make sure you know what you're doing, and if you don't, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I've always tried to take that into the sort of the rest of life. So that's sort of the two biggest lessons I learned from my time in the service.
Matt and I first met in 2014 and have been in good comms ever since. Matt has a wealth of experience in a variety of things, following an extensive career in the Navy to more recently working as the head coach at Reebok and Adidas HQ in Stockport. Over the years, Matt has faced some testing adversity through injury, which just emphasises the type of person he is: strong-minded, persistent, and always willing to work hard. Mr. Thompson, thank you very much for joining me on this episode.
JB, how are we doing?
I'm good, man. We've had many a heart-to-heart in the past, but
many.
Hopefully this isn't too formal.
First and foremost, what's going on with that facial hair? That is terrible.
This is I guess we'll call it a lockdown moustache. I'm going to try and grow it out because I can't grow any facials.
Lockdown look.
Yeah, we'll call it lockdown look. But
that's one thing I do have on you, which is not a lot, is my beard growing ability is far superior.
Yours looks much more groomed than it has been as well. It's been very bushy in the past.
It has, but to be fair, that's because the top of the head has gone forever, so I have to look after that. I have to look after the beard now.
You're basically drawing everyone's attention to the chin.
That's it, because you don't want to be looking on top of the head at the minute.
I guess we start with just looking at your sort of journey in the Navy. What were your 2 to 3 biggest learns whilst at the Navy, and how did you start your time there?
So strap in. This could be a good question. So I did exactly 7 years, 1 month in the Navy, which isn't a huge amount of time, but it was a significant portion of my 20s. And the reason I say that is I sort of played rugby to a decent level, so sort of I'd say like semi-competitive, but I was never probably good enough to really make that step into the professional ranks. And similar with my other sport, sort of main sport with being cricket, it was the same thing. And I sort of didn't really like school, and I wouldn't say I'm academically minded. So university lasted 6 months and I chinned that off. And ultimately I went home after sort of sacking university off, and my dad at the time just basically said, like, look, you need to figure out can we swear on this podcast?
Yeah, maybe not the big F, but maybe the others.
Okay.
It's conversation. If it comes out, it comes out.
All right.
Roar as you can.
He basically said, you need to sort your out because you're not living under my roof, not doing anything. And I was like, well, fair enough. But I think what he was ex-military, did 8 years in the army, and he just said, I think it would be good for you. And after looking into a few different areas and whatnot, I decided I wanted to be an officer in the Royal Marines originally, and then got talked out of it by my mum and ex-girlfriend at the time, who basically didn't want me to go to Afghanistan. And I ended up stumping on the submarine service. I wanted that something a little bit specialised, something I could be proud of, and frankly something that paid more money than sort of the general service, and the submarine service did that. And the main reason for sort of joining was based off of even early 20s, I didn't want to look back on my 20s and not having achieved anything like maybe some of my friends had, or looked like they were going to, sort of never leaving a small town. And I wanted to look back on it with at least achieve something. So that was the main reason for joining up. And then sort of to squash it all together and coming to the end of that, a couple of the biggest things I learned, the biggest lessons I learned, you can take one as kind of tongue-in-cheek negative, and one is definitely a positive. And the first one be like shit rolls downhill. What I mean by that is if you're at the bottom of the hill, you're going to get the rubbish. But what I learned very quickly is the higher up that hill you climb, the less big that shit roll is.
The less momentum it has, so to
correct.
speak.
The less that's it. The less momentum. And then the other big one is if you don't know anything, ask. And the reason I say that is I think that's a really important lesson that you can carry over into any walk of life. And being on a submarine, if you don't know something, it could have massive sort of ramifications on the safety of the submarine and the crew and your mates essentially. So you best make sure you know what you're doing, and if you don't, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I've always tried to take that into the sort of the rest of life. So that's sort of the two biggest lessons I learned from my time in the service.
Just touching back on the sort of asking, I think it's something, especially when you're younger anyway, I suppose when we look up to people, we sort of fear asking almost.
Mm-hmm.
Is it ever something you worried about or sort of were nervous about, or did it always just sort of, that was the go-to? If you were unsure, you would always ask the question?
I think maybe it's just my personality, but if I didn't know, I'd always rather ask, because it was drilled into us quite early. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You've got to be brave enough to ask that, and almost put your own insecurities to the side a little bit, because ultimately in that situation, when you're in a team environment or an environment like on a submarine, 200 meters under the water, if you don't ask a question and you don't know what you're doing, and something, like I say, or ironically, this phrase of shit rolls downhill, or all these things get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it could cause massive problems just because you didn't ask that question of, what does this mean, or what does that valve do, or can you just clarify what this is for me? And no one, certainly from now I'm in like I suppose a leadership position in a way, is no one's going to begrudge you, or they might take the mick, but in the long term, no one's going to begrudge you asking that question if it's going to reaffirm your understanding of an evolution or a topic or anything. And I've always said to anybody, just even when I'm coaching classes now or dealing with online clients or anything, I would never be like sort of ridicule anyone for asking a question at all. I think it's just be brave and just ask it. If that leader or that person's worth their salt, they won't ever sort of ridicule you for it.
Yeah, and I guess the longer you leave things, like anything, the longer you leave it, the bigger it gets, the more overwhelming it becomes. On a personal note, have you ever left anything like too late that you've sort of maybe should have addressed earlier? Or
not so much too late, but I do have it's quite a funny story. And it was actually around, just off the top of my head, really. I can actually remember when me and my wife went to Bali. Now my wife went to Bali for the first time, and it was about when I was going to pop the question, and I had to smuggle the ring through, as I'm sure every man's done, smuggled it through security and the airport, and I was worrying that she was going to see it, and I was like, oh, fuck, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I didn't actually pop the question until about 4 days into the holiday, and the reason. It was more that I was like, I need to get this question out. I need to ask her, because I am worrying about this so much. It's ruining my holiday. So I actually ended up going earlier than what I wanted to, trying to look for like the perfect moment. I was just like, let's just go with it. Let's just ask the question, see what happens. She'll either say no, and it'll be a really awkward holiday, or she'll say yes, and then we'll be happily ever after. And thankfully, she said yes, and the rest is history, as they say. But that would probably be the one that sticks out, because I remember like really stressing about it for no reason. So I just asked it earlier before I even wanted to.
Well, I guess there's always a reason, but I thought you may touch on that, because I remember you saying like it was literally the biggest burden of a trip the first few days. So paranoid about something going wrong, something happening.
Or she going into my suitcase and finding the ring and spoiling it and blah blah. And I actually ended up doing it. We were just sat by the pool in the hotel, or like the villa, and I was just like, I need to get this done. I just trotted off into the room and did the deed.
Done. Well, like anything, simplicity is best, which kind of brings us nicely on to next question.
Yes.
Your transition from the Navy. So I think a lot of people struggle with like a shift in identity, especially if they've been doing something for a long time. How did you find that transition from being full-time in the Navy to being a full-time trainer and coach? I know you dabbled with coaching when you were, in the Navy as well.
That's a great question, and I don't think it didn't come straight away. It definitely, to be honest, when you come from like essentially institutionalized in like the military and the submarine service or any member of the armed forces, trying to change to working with like civilian population again, it doesn't just, you can't just switch off the past however many years of how you've spoke or dealt with people or interacted with people. And one of the biggest things for me was and I'll openly say, is that in the submarine service at that time when I was in, there was no women at all, so I didn't interact on like a professional level with women at all, other than like coaching, at the military box, or when I was home coaching at 3D or wherever. But so to work with females in a professional capacity for essentially the first time was one of the biggest challenges, and not in a way that I found it tough. It was just, how do you, when you've been so used to interacting with lads and stuff, it's different how you interact with women. And I would probably say it took me maybe, it would have been cool if we could have got someone who knew me then to now, like from the business, because
seeing the difference.
Yeah, you are totally different now. So it probably took me about a year to transition from like, and my personality changed from what I would say like a military Matt to sort of just normal, happy-go-lucky Thommo. It definitely didn't happen overnight.
Just off of tangent there a little, what other things, not just coaching and job role specifically, what other things did you sort of find, personally being in that professional environment was a bit more challenging? But what about life generally? Was there anything?
You mean becoming from the military to a civilian?
Yeah, just generally.
Biggest thing is like, not as a civilian, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to anybody, but nothing is given to you, like literally nothing. For like the first 2 years, I didn't even go and get I'd go to the dentist, as horrible as that sounds, because in the military, you're told when you eventually your dental appointment is, your doctors are taken care of, you've got a scrannel to go and eat your food, you don't have to worry if you don't want to about your own food or anything like that. So it's almost like you're becoming a civilian, and everything, you've got to do everything yourself. And that was a really big change, really, mentally, like just trying to handle your own admin, because no one's going to handle it for you. That was the biggest one, definitely.
It's almost like a big change in independence. Although you were in your later 20s and you were in your own head quite independent, it's almost like, I'm not going to be told when and where this is. I need to go and sort it out myself.
Yeah, 100%.
Where was your sort of journey? Where did it start, coaching? When did you first start? Maybe not in a CrossFit gym specifically, but where did you first get your hand into coaching?
That's an interest. So my first hand-on of coaching was probably coaching rugby when I was maybe 12 or 13. I've always been sort of that minded, like sort of helping people how to move better or do better, and even to the point of like in teams, at that age I'd be the one that would take people through like moves and that sort of thing. And sort of from a purely coaching point of view, I actually did my cricket coaching courses when I was still in school, so sort of 16, 17, 18. I started coaching at my club back then, New Brighton Cricket Club, and I was coaching the juniors there, and I used to run like camps and that sort of thing. So I think that's where my initial coaching and being confident in front of people and talking and sort of communicating came from, and that sort of just carried on through really, right the way up until I sort of found CrossFit in 2012, 2013, and just sort of went down that rabbit hole of coaching from there.
So would you, for anyone sort of younger getting into coaching as well, is that something, especially being older, you look at as an advantage, just being able to coach in more than just the gym or more than just on field, try and involve yourself in as much as possible?
I think my wife would probably attest to this. She's a teacher. I think you can the ability to teach and instruct and coach people. You can apply that to any walk of life. It's fairly universal being how to do that. It's the technical knowledge of that sport or that the gym or whatever, business coaching. It's all those are the things you have to learn. The art of coaching and teaching and instructing is fairly I would argue it's fairly generic in whatever it is you're doing. But it's knowing the subject matter that you're teaching, which I think it makes you sort of successful in that sense.
Yeah, the sort of coaching, the leadership and the way in which you deal with people's almost, or it should be relatively similar across all boards, but then specializing in what you're specifically teaching, I guess, obviously. You need to know what you're talking about, hopefully.
You need to know what you're talking about.
That's why you're there.
That's where the credibility comes from.
Yeah, massively. So who's been your biggest influence as a coach that might not be a coach specifically, or is there someone in your realm that's been a bit of a role model for you?
I don't think necessarily a coach specifically has been a role model. I think I seem to, just from my background and my personality, maybe I seem to gravitate towards people who have held leadership roles in the past or continue to do so. That seem to, those sort of people that walk into a room or are extremely, and people sort of sit back and take note and this, they've got a bit of an aura about them.
Yeah.
And they're those people that can fundamentally articulate and communicate well, like either what their passion is or their sport or their experience. They're the sorts of people that I kind of look up to with how I try and hold myself. Obviously most people know him, but I've sort of followed for a long time. Is Jocko Willink. I find to be unbelievably sort of just his mindset and how he sort of says things how they are, but he says them in a way that makes sense, and I think everyone could understand. I think he is someone that I would try and look up to, and how I try and hold myself as a leader. And his book Extreme Ownership is one of the ones I would massively recommend anyone should read, because it's really thought provoking. So probably him, to be honest. He would probably be the one. What's
your biggest takeaway from that book then? What's your one, if you could sort of sum up the biggest learn
from that book?
From that book specifically, yeah.
As daft as it sounds, but to take ownership of what you as a leader, you've got to take ownership of that situation. And more from an example that he uses is, say you, James, don't know, you mess up one of your coaching classes, and I'm assessing you, and you don't teach a certain, let's just say the power clean, don't teach the power clean correctly. Rather than me as the leader and assessing you being like, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, blah, 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 and putting all the negativity on you, it's on the leader to take charge of that. So it would almost be like, it's my fault you didn't teach that correctly.
Yeah.
Let's go through it. Let me make sure that you understand it, so next time you nail it first time and obviously move forward. It was taking ownership of every situation and almost taking that responsibility to a point off of your subordinates or your the instructors, and that shows true leadership to me, the ability to sort of put your hand up and say, I didn't do this right, but this is what we're going to do to move forward. And that's probably the biggest takeaway for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people make mistakes, and if you're theoretically the one person who was there to help and teach that person, and they mess up the assessment, you can't just point fingers completely, because at the end of the day, you may not have given them the tools to deal with that circumstance, the pressure, the movement, regardless of what caused the problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That goes for it, not just coaching a class, that's
anything.
CEOs, companies, anything.
Anything.
So in terms of culture then, leadership being something that you're in a position you do now, you've got obviously employees that you work with at Reebok and Adidas, you've got your online clients. What culture do you try and create in them people? Is it the same between work and online? Is it slightly different depending on goals, or are the values similar?
I think you'll have heard this phrase a lot, and probably the people that are listening to this will be the same. But I think it ultimately it does depend. It depends. It seems to be a phrase that becomes more and more prominent when it comes to coaching. But how I sort of interact with people, and this is probably where I've changed from when I first left the Navy. I would interact with everybody quite the same. Simply because that's how I'd always done it and been successful when I was there. Whereas I think you've got to be a bit more empathetic to people and their situations, and you don't know what the other person's been through that day, so you act a certain way, and you could rub them up the wrong way or whatnot. But I would certainly say, dependent on what the goals of that person are, and sort of knowing the client or the member of staff, and getting to know them is almost dictates how you interact with that person. And I think that's a big part of coaching and dealing with people and communicating with people regularly. Is you've got to get to know that person, get to know your clients, get to know what makes them tick, what doesn't, know their circumstances outside of the gym to a point. You don't know what's going on in their personal life when they walk through the door. So if you then start having banter with them or slamming them, and their grands and granddads just died in a car crash and they have a go at you, whose fault is that? It's probably not theirs. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing. I'd say is getting to know your clients outside of their training program is been a big thing for me.
I think that's something you can take into life as well. Especially with everything going on at the moment, it's just appreciating someone else's, probably going through something that you have nothing, to do with, or nothing about. And especially from a coaching point of view, I would argue that's one of the most important roles, especially in a group setting. Treating everyone the same is challenging, because, for example, an individual might love lots of encouragement, whereas someone would rather just the acknowledgement that they're doing the right thing and they're doing a good job. And it's being able to understand personality types, which is, back to the whole coaching before.
You froze. Yeah. I mean, what I'd say is, without naming names, there's a guy that I used to coach at 3D, who was a paramedic, an ambulance paramedic, and sometimes he would come in super happy, and sometimes he would come in angry and miserable, or what you would perceive to be miserable and fed up and in a bit of a grouchy mood. Or some people would probably look at him and be like, that guy's a dick. Do you know what I mean? But what those guys probably don't know or weren't privy to was A, he's a paramedic, and B, he could have just been at a call where a baby's just died, or he's had to give CPR to a baby, or in these high stressful situations, and they walk through the door, and you need to be able to know that that person could have potentially been in that situation, and he may not be being a dick just for the sake of it. Sometimes you just have to take a minute and sort of think, what could that person could have been in, before you then sort of make your next steps. So yeah, that was just one example that sprang to mind.
It's just always considering someone else's point of view, almost, you know what I mean, and just being willing to probably, like you said, something that was a big change when you left the military world is just being aware of multiple sides to one coin, I guess.
Yeah, 100%.
So something I've been really sort of looking forward to getting to, and I know there's people who I've spoken to who want to listen to this part specifically. But
wow, here we go. Let me get the coffee.
As a friend, I have been massively impressed by your sort of resilience to injuries over the years. I have actually been there. Well, I was there for one, a big one, which was the Achilles. I still remember the noise when it went in the empty gym. So I think something that will be a massive value to other people is sort of talking them through your journey as not necessarily the guy that was injured, but just your sort of resilience and faith around injuries, your sort of commitment to the process and knowing things would eventually be okay. So I guess we start. Achilles was the first one.
Achilles, the Achilles was the first one that we know of.
The list goes on.
There's, the reason sort of the rugby career ended up sort of petering out onto the back burner was I actually ruptured my ACL in my right knee at the age of 18. And that was the first sort of significant injury setback I had. That was the nail in the coffin of my sort of dreams to go and become a professional rugby player. And then, so that was 2000 and...
Don't give away your age. Don't give away your age.
Oh, I know. Do you know what? I can't remember the exact date. I was 21, so people can figure it out. But yeah, so that was the first big one. I actually didn't have any surgery on that knee, so that ACL's not been there ever since, which is a important point when we go down the line of my quite extensive list of injuries. Now, you said obviously resilient. Resilient is mentally, most definitely. I would say I've been resilient, but with regards to the my body being resilient, you could maybe argue it isn't, but that's a different rabbit hole. So yeah, the first one sort of CrossFit related was the Achilles, left Achilles, and that was, I think the rehab for that I was told was going to be, I think, 18 months, and I was back within 11. Where are we going with this? I've gone off on a train.
So more so, what the injury was, maybe not in full detail about how it was sustained, but like you can by any means go into that, and then just your sort of mental process, and I get almost the physical process of dealing with that as well.
Okay, so yeah, so that was the first one, the Achilles, and then I also from there I had a meniscus tear in my right knee, which required surgery. That was a bucket tear, so that locked the knee out. And then the most recent one, which I had, which was I had a sports hernia and a splayed external oblique. So I had a tear in my external oblique as well. So they're the three big ones through my, well, I'd probably say like CrossFit competitive career. Basically every 2 years I seem to break down, and the sort of physically, I'll start with mentally. Mentally, I've always been quite resilient in the sense of and diligent with my rehab and doing rehab and the importance of doing it, and almost stubborn. I think the overriding sort of trait I could say that I've had for all the injuries is stubbornness, and that you can perceive that stubbornness in a positive way. In that I'm not going to let that injury sort of beat me. And I don't think, now I look back, I don't think any of them did. I think I'll probably be fair in saying that. I come through the other side of each one eventually. Mm-hmm. But it's also, and being stubborn is negative, and you can only, hindsight's 20/20. You look back on situations and, you know, you could have, would have, should have probably done things differently. But in the moment, you're only trying to do the best you can. And for me, I was probably a bit stubborn with rushing back to training and maybe almost running a little bit before I can walk. And I definitely at times jeopardized my rehab and almost nearly re-injured myself. I would say every time at one point at each injury, there was a time in the rehab where I went too hard and I almost nearly put me back to square one. And I did that 3 times. Now you can say that, well, that's stupid. But that's just, I was that single-minded on getting back to competing. And I didn't have anyone to sort of really, that I wasn't listening to people when they would say slow down or anything. I was like, I know my body, I know what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And like I say, stubbornness, it was definitely the overriding sort of trait of, I'm not going to let this beat me, but almost too stubborn to listen to other people. And that would be one of the biggest things is you've got to have that. If I could have that person and just be open to listening to that person that I respect and trust implicitly for them to say you need to stop, or like you're going too heavy or you're pushing too hard. I wish I'd had that person, and maybe subsequent injuries down the line wouldn't have been there. But like I say, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. Do you think that was like a side of frustration then? Just like, right, this has been going on forever. I just want to get back to things. Or do you think it was, you did feel like you're almost ready? It was just approached maybe in the wrong way. How would you say it worked?
I think, to be honest, I feel like I felt pressure to get back and be competing again, because the sport at that time, was moving so quickly that within a year, if you were out for a year, you were going to get left behind, and like we all are when we move into sort of competitive CrossFit or trying that sort of competitive CrossFit out, you want to sort of keep up with your peers, and it was almost like I think I was just looking over my shoulder and being like, if I don't get back soon, then I'm going to be left behind. I'm never going to be able to make progress, and it's not going to be worth it. And blah 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 blah. You go down that negative feedback loop. So I think that was the big one for me. I was almost pushing my rehab so hard that just because I didn't want to not be relevant, I wanted to. You know what I mean? I can say that I didn't want to just be like, oh, do you remember that guy?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be, competitive in the sport within the country and whatnot, and I didn't want to let an injury stop that from happening.
I think it's a bittersweet thing, isn't it? Like the pressure of being accountable to your rehab does make you do it, but then on the contrary, on the other side, the flip side, it's like you don't want it to become that much of an obsession that again you end up forcing stuff that maybe is not there to be forced at that time. How would you sort of, for anyone dealing with like a persistent niggle, whether that's lower back, elbows, hamstring, apart from rest like we hear all the time, what sort of strategies would you recommend, whether they be psychological or
I mean, just to finish on the injury side of things before we go into that, I think what I'd say is like at no point through any of those three serious injuries that I had, all three required surgery, is at no point did I stop training, did I just jack it in, and there's always something you can do. It's just being smart about it. And one thing I didn't have, which I wish I had now when I look back on all three situations, is I didn't have a training partner who to hold me accountable to those things that I respected enough, like a regular training partner. I also didn't have or a coach, so I didn't have like someone who cared about me enough to say you need to stop or to stop this, or knew me as an athlete. I think that's massive. One of the biggest things I could say to anybody is, if you're going through that situation where you've had like you've got a serious injury, you require surgery or something, it's like you have that conversation with a coach or a friend or a training partner. Say you need to hold me accountable through my rehab, both to do it, but also not to push so much that it's going to be, detrimental to my recovery. That's one of the biggest things I would say, just on that.
Just having someone, almost as reassurance to sensibly manage, what is going on at that time. And I think obviously, like you said before, being in the Navy, when you've always had that someone to tell you when and what to do, being thrown in on your own, in something like that is a massive learning curve and a challenge.
Yeah, it isn't like the Achilles I did while I was still serving. So all my rehab was handled like by the Royal Navy, which I'm obviously massively grateful for. I was in physio twice a day. I had a physiotherapist helping me get back. I had all the best equipment, blah 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 blah. All the way through. Whereas the knee surgery and the groin, I've just had to essentially rehab myself. And it's obviously they've worked out okay now. Could they have gone better if I had been in a different situation, or I had that coach or someone to guide me a bit more? Then who knows? But seems to be doing all right now.
Good. That's the most important thing. So we're all human. So on those days, whether they be during injury, whether it be now, just, with any struggle, what sort of self-care do you like to implement? Is there anything specifically? I know obviously there's been a shift in training, like training once you sort of take it away from being competitive actually is a psychological relief rather than a burden. So what does that look like for you now?
Well, with regards to sort of mentally switching off when things are down, first part of the question, I think one thing you can't rely. I said this to so many people during lockdown because it seems to be so prominent with regards to training and all these sorts of things. Is you can't rely on motivation to be there every single day. It's just the most motivated. Kevin Hart, the most motivated person in the world, it seems, isn't motivated every day. But what he does have is discipline, and his eyes are on his goals, and his why for whatever he's doing is that strong that it outweighs any sort of motivation to wanes in motivation, should I say. So hugely is I know even on like the down days or the days where like I've got that little bit of a niggle, or like going back to your earlier point, or anything like that where I'm just not feeling right, is the why to my training is that strong now, and the reason I do it, that the discipline is there to act on that. I know, like, if the reason I go into that gym is to fulfill my internal, make me feel better, and I know it makes me feel better, so I know I'm a completely different person when I've trained, or when I've got my training in, and that's the why I do it in the first place. I'm not driven by numbers anymore. I'm not driven by competition necessarily, even though maybe down the line as a master that I do want to maybe get back out on the floor again, but that might never happen, and I'm okay with that. I'm actually genuinely okay with that now. I'm not defined as a CrossFit athlete. That doesn't define me. I'm defined personally by being a husband to Amy and a friend, and potentially a father one day, and all these sorts of things, which are way stronger than getting out on the floor and competing in a CrossFit competition. And that's what keeps me going to the gym, as opposed to, the motivation or like the pressure to train because I have to hit X, Y, Z because Dave on Instagram did it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's the biggest thing. It's just knowing the real reason that you're training, or what you're training for, as opposed to what you think you're training for.
And it's just being honest with that. And I think a lot of people have more of a, if they were to look in the mirror, it's a bit of a conflict. Like, they feel a certain way, but at their core, they don't feel that way. How would you, or what did you do specifically to just align that core value with, external action? Like, was there anything specific, or is it just the type of person you are, really?
It's funny you say that, because what actually happened was I was coming back from the latest surgery, and I was training, and the rehab was going really well. And at that time, I was at work, and I was on a late, and this was probably back maybe February time, and I was squatting, and I was like, I need to get my squat number back up fast. I need my leg strength to come back, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up I had to bail in a squat, ditch it off my back, and straight away I felt my groin, and I was like, I really thought I'd messed it up, and I was like, I just had this moment. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're an idiot. And I actually, that drive home, you know what that drive is. It's probably close to an hour.
It's a long.
It's a long time, and I was on the motorway, and I didn't have any music on. My groin was really sore, and I was so miserable, because I thought I'd hurt myself again, and I was like, I was embarrassed at myself, because I was like, you're not learning from your actions. You're literally doing the same thing over and over again, and you keep getting hurt. And I was like, if you don't sort this out, you could be permanently hurt. And is that what you want? For the sake of what? I was like, I'm 34. Like, there's that window of you're not a spring chicken anymore. That's all these sort of thoughts going through my head. And it was at that point I sort of went, you need to make a change here. So ironically, it was being that close to being re-hurt again, which changed my mindset. I was like, it's not worth it. It just wasn't worth it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So more of like it was almost a light bulb moment for you,
100%.
basically.
It was a light bulb moment, 100%. And my whole goal now is, as both a coach to clients and clients that are competitive in the sport of fitness, and clients that just want to look good naked, or have other goals, sport specific goals, whatever is, to not make the mistakes that I've made, because I've made every single mistake in the book, like over the course of the last 6 years with regards to training and injuries and all these sorts of things, is not to make the mistakes. I don't want those people to make the mistakes I made, because if I hadn't have made them, where could my career have gone, or potentially not gone to? Who knows? But like, I feel well sort of qualified to talk about what you should and shouldn't do with regards to training and injuries and rehab from injuries and those sorts of things, because I've done everything wrong in the past. Like, and I can look back at that and be like, well, I know this is not what you need to do. You should be doing X, Y, Z, not ABC. So yeah, that's it for me. I just don't want people to make the mistakes that potentially I made, chasing something that is either it's not going to happen, or they feel pressured into going down a certain way, or doing a certain way, because that's what their social peers or social pressures dictate.
Again, slightly off tangent, but it was something that came up into like a conversation I had this week, and I think a lot of people, when they get into training, they do hit this point where they see progress, but then there's this shift in their head of, okay, I'm not just doing it because I've changed my life now. I'm doing it and I'm putting pressure on myself for almost an outcome, whether that be a time, whether that be a weight lifted. From your own experience specifically, like, what would you tell someone, especially early on in their journey of fitness? Because at the end of the day, that self-sabotage and that pressure can actually really inhibit any long-term sustainable
progress.
What would you tell someone to do if they were, whether it's a client, if they were putting that much pressure on themselves?
It's a very difficult question, because who am I or you or anyone to shatter anyone's dreams? If you were to come to me and say, I want to go to the CrossFit Games, but you've got a squat like a car crash, and you can't deadlift, or all these things, it's probably not going to happen. But why? Who am I, or who is anyone to say to that person, you shouldn't do that? So I would never ever say to anybody, like, that's not a realistic goal. But I also think you've got an obligation and a duty. Like I said, I've been that person who wrongly thought they were going to go to the top of the sport, but I didn't have anyone to turn around and say to me, Matt, you've got too many injuries and you're too old. Like, it ain't gonna happen. But I think you have to guide that person, or be honest with that person that it could take a little bit longer, or make it really sort of black and white, and be like, look, this is what X are doing in the sport, whether that be rugby or cricket or football or CrossFit or weightlifting, and this is what you're doing. This is where you are, and this is where we need to go. This is how long the process could take, and are you willing to sign up to that? Are you willing to do X, Y, Z? Are you willing to sacrifice all these things? Because if you are, then let's go. But if you're not, maybe we need to realign what your actual goals and what your actual why is behind anything. And I think once you can make clients understand and accept that, I think from a coaching point of view, you're automatically going to be successful, because the client buys, and the other person buys into whatever it is. From a coaching point of view, you're doing, they're not trying to kid themselves into being something that deep down they either don't want to be, or that they're physically just never ever going to get there. and you can then obviously write a program design or coach that person through that process, and you're both on the same page rather than someone thinking one thing, someone thinking the other.
It's just, sensibly managing an expectation and just having honest transparency, both parties, like as a coach and as a person being there willing to get better, have someone honestly, guide you in a way they think most appropriate.
I mean, like, you can think it's a silly example, but it'd be like me at 5'7" and 85 kilos turning around to you as my rugby coach and saying, I want to play second row. You'd be like, genetics.
Doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. But who are you to shatter the dreams of that guy? There's a way and a mean of navigating that person through to you maybe steer them into another position. Just be like, well, most second rows are 6'6", and your dad's only 5'10", so you're only going to grow to a max, maybe, I don't know, 5'10", 5'9". Do you know what I mean? I think there's ways and means of doing it.
There's a context in which that needs to come across, and again, it always boils back down to the honesty. So, if you could travel back in time, this is my favorite question, to the Thommo leaving school, whether it's high school, primary school, whatever, as far back as you can remember, has your perception on things changed? Not necessarily like life, because there's that's a conversation in itself, but the journey you're on now, is it something you sort of envisioned? What wisdom would you share with your younger self if you could jump back in time?
That is a good question. I think I'm on roughly the right path. I think I'm pretty happy with how life's going. I think I've had some amazing experiences working for Reebok and Adidas and being in probably the best coaching gig in the world, I would probably say. And I've been to some amazing places both as an athlete and a coach in the Navy. I did some things that, not many 20-year-olds can say they've done. And I think one thing I would say to young Thommo is to stay in school. Pay a bit more attention in class. Don't just think about sports. But it sounds a bit specific, but nothing in life is given. That's one thing I've definitely learned is nothing's just going to get handed to you on a plate. It just isn't. If you want to be successful, you've got to go and work really hard for it, and be the hardest working person in that room. I think that's you can take that mantra into any form of life. Know in yourself that you've done everything possible to push towards whatever your goal or whatever you perceive you want your life to look like, because it's not going to get handed to you on a plate. Life's not nice like that. You've got to work hard for anything, and that would be. I don't think I had that mindset as a younger Thommo at all, but I definitely reiterate that and to myself as a younger person, because what's been going on in my life the last couple of years, and it's definitely made me realise that if you want something out of it, you've got to go and do it yourself. No one's going to hand it to you. That's
perfect. Where can people find you, Thommo? Instagram, email, anywhere?
Oh, this is it. Instagram, Matt.Thommo_, I think. Matt.Thompson_, I think is it. Same on Twitter, and I think they're the two I'm active on the most. And just drop me a message at Matthew.Thompson2@Reebok.com if you want to chat anything. And there you go.
Well, thank you very, very much for being so open and honest, and spending the time to do this as well.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, mate. Just want to say I love what you're doing. I think it's brilliant. It's great to see you doing so well, and to see you flourish with everything you're doing, other than the facial hair. It's brilliant. So keep it up.
Thank you very much.